How a convicted SS officer walked free after the war. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. In the summer of 1976, in a quiet village in eastern France, a former officer of Nazi Germany was living an ordinary life. He translated military history books. He spoke calmly to journalists. He insisted that the past was behind him. But history had not finished with him. 3 decades earlier, this man had commanded one of the most feared units of the Waffen-SS. His name was tied to some of the most controversial crimes committed against Allied soldiers and civilians in Western Europe. He had been tried, sentenced, and then released. And yet, long after courts had closed their files, another form of judgment arrived. This is not just a story about one man's end. It is a story about power, accountability, and what happens when justice feels incomplete, when memory refuses to stay buried. Because the fate of Joachim Peiper forces us to confront a difficult question. What happens when history's verdict and society's conscience no longer align? Joachim Peiper was born in 1915 into a Germany already shaped by war and resentment. His father, a veteran of the First World War, carried deep bitterness over Germany's defeat. Like many families of that generation, the Peipers embraced narratives that explained loss not as military failure, but as betrayal. These ideas mattered. They shaped how a young Joachim understood loyalty, honor, and violence. As Germany descended into political chaos during the Weimar years, extremist movements offered clarity and purpose. When Adolf Hitler rose to power in 1933, Peiper was barely 18. He joined the Hitler Youth and soon after entered the SS, an organization that promised belonging, status, and authority. Peiper was ambitious and confident. More importantly, he understood how to please those above him. His demeanor and discipline caught the attention of Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS. Before long, Peiper became Himmler's personal adjutant, traveling with him, observing his decisions, and witnessing the inner workings of a regime built on ideology and fear. This proximity mattered. Peiper was present at scenes most people would never see. He observed executions in occupied Poland. He witnessed early programs of mass killing disguised as medical policy. Later, during interrogations, he described these events with emotional detachment, as if recounting technical procedures rather than human destruction. Over time, detachment hardened into habit. When Peiper moved from administrative proximity to battlefield command, he carried that mindset with him. He earned a reputation for aggressive leadership, bold tactics, and disregard for restraint. His unit became known not only for speed, but for what followed in its wake. On the Eastern Front, villages were destroyed in retaliation for resistance. Civilians were treated as obstacles rather than people. Peiper's men acquired a nickname that reflected their approach, one rooted in fear rather than discipline. In Italy, the pattern continued. After partisan activity near the town of Boves in 1943, Peiper gave assurances of restraint. Those assurances were broken. The town was destroyed, and civilians paid the price. These actions were not battlefield necessity. They were messages meant to intimidate through punishment. By late 1944, Germany was losing the war, yet Hitler ordered a final major offensive in the West, the Battle of the Bulge. Peiper was given command of a fast-moving armored column tasked with breaking through Allied lines. What followed would define his legacy. In December 1944, near the Belgian crossroads of Bognes, Peiper's unit encountered a convoy of American soldiers. The Americans surrendered. They were unarmed. What happened next became known as the Malmedy Massacre. Survivors later testified that prisoners were lined up and fired upon. Some escaped by feigning death. Others were pursued. Similar incidents followed in nearby villages. By the time the offensive stalled, hundreds of Allied soldiers and civilians were dead. When the war ended, Peiper was captured by American forces. During interrogation, he showed no ideological retreat. He remained committed to Nazi beliefs and expressed anger that the regime's enemies were now in power. In 1946, the U.S. military tribunal at Dachau tried Peiper and dozens of Waffen-SS members for war crimes. The proceedings were extensive. Witnesses testified. Evidence was presented. The verdict was severe. Peiper was sentenced to death. But the story did not end there. The convicted men alleged that interrogations had involved coercion. Public pressure grew. Investigations followed. Over time, sentences were reviewed and reduced. In 1951, Piper's sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. Later, it was reduced further. In 1956, Joachim Piper was released. The decision shocked many. For survivors and families of victims, it felt like a betrayal. For others, it was framed as legal correction. But what was clear is that Piper returned to civilian life without public remorse. He found work in industry, including with a major German automobile manufacturer. Yet his presence triggered outrage. Trade unions protested. His employment became controversial. Eventually, he was dismissed. Piper relocated to France, living under his real name. He worked as a translator and gave interviews in which he portrayed himself as a victim, harassed for a past he claimed to have already paid for. These statements mattered. They angered those who believed justice had already been too lenient. Activists distributed flyers revealing his identity to local residents. Journalists returned. Memory resurfaced. On July 14, 1976, France's National Day, Piper's home was attacked and set ablaze by unknown assailants. He did not survive. There was no trial, no verdict, no official closure. The reaction was telling. There were no public memorials, no official mourning. For many, this was not tragedy, it was consequence. Others warned that vigilante action, no matter the target, undermines the rule of law. And that is where Piper's story becomes more than biography. His life exposes a fracture between legal justice and moral reckoning. Courts had ruled, sentences had been reduced, yet society had not moved on. Piper embodied a truth many found unbearable, that someone responsible for immense harm could return to ordinary life without accountability that felt proportionate. His death raises uncomfortable questions. What happens when legal systems fail to satisfy collective memory? When punishment feels incomplete? When ideology leaves scars that law alone cannot heal? Piper was not a foot soldier. He was not ignorant. He was present at the formation of policy and its execution. He chose aggression repeatedly, even when restraint was possible. Yet his ultimate fate came not from a court, but from unresolved history. This does not justify what happened to him, but it explains why it did. Because when crimes are remembered, but justice feels unfinished, the past does not stay silent. Joachim Piper's story is not about revenge, it is about reckoning. It shows us what happens when violence is rewarded, excused, and later minimized, when systems fail to fully confront the consequences of power exercised without restraint. Piper was shaped by ideology, elevated by obedience, and protected by bureaucracy. When that protection ended, history reclaimed him, not through courts, but through memory. This is not a comfortable lesson, because it reminds us that justice delayed or diluted does not disappear. It transforms. It resurfaces in unpredictable and dangerous ways. The real warning here is not about one man. It is about what happens when societies move forward without fully reckoning with what they leave behind. Because when accountability feels incomplete, the past does not rest. It waits.